Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. In this one I want to talk about the news that has come out of like the first, I suppose, day or two of Star Wars Celebration Europe 2023 in London. So far, for the most part in terms of news, we've mainly had the big Lucasfilm panel. So we've learned about sort of live action shows and also movie announcements. We have had the High Republic panel, and then it's basically been a bunch of sort of, I think, other separate like interviews that they've had on like the main stage and stuff like that where info has come from. So it seems like pretty much the only stuff we're really waiting for after this is like if there's going to be any other video game news. I think we're expecting another Jedi Survivor trailer, but you know, that game is so close to releasing now, it's pretty exciting. But if there's going to be like announcements of other Star Wars video games, and then of course animation stuff, which I looked at the schedule. I don't think that's until like Monday. I think that's when they have like the Bad Batch Visions panel and stuff like that. So we'll see what they do with that in the coming days. But anyway, let's get into this. I'm using this website here, the Hollow Files, because they seem to have a nice overall breakdown of the panel, including stuff that they didn't really kind of publicly put out there. Because if you go just based on like the official Star Wars website, for the most part, they're only revealing like a couple of kind of key pieces of info. Like it's basically the Ahsoka trailer and the 3 movie announcements, and then from the High Republic they at least put up a kind of a recap of the High Republic panel, which is kind of interesting. But that's really been everything. It means that they skipped over quite a bit of stuff that they actually showed at the panel. Now, obviously, some of this is stuff that is not meant to go out publicly, but a lot of it has leaked. I'm not going to go over it more than, I suppose, what is included in this article, but let's get through it. So, first of all, they talked about Andor Season 2. The main thing here is just that they confirmed Season 2 will be the final season, and I think that's a good decision. I think it was the right choice to just decide on, boom, we're just doing this much and that's all that we need. I do think Andor as a show, in terms of the sort of scope of its story, only needed another season, and I think that's fine. Season 1, 2, and then Rogue One tell the story of Andor, and that's fine. They're halfway through filming and it's coming fall 2024, so there is going to be quite a big gap between season 1 and 2, but it seems like it's a pretty kind of high-end production here. A few other things, you know, Kino Loy is going to be back. That's interesting. And then beyond that, you know, they showed a teaser trailer with some stuff here. You know, Andor had a new haircut. Genevieve O'Reilly, so Mon Mothma is kind of back doing some rebellion stuff. So it looks like they're actually going to really kind of bridge the gap here and show kind of some kind of progress here. So that's all sort of exciting. But we'll move on straight away to some High Republic stuff here, and that is the Acolyte. So this is the hype is sort of building for this one, I think, and there's some interesting stuff going on here. So unfortunately, they still haven't revealed a lot about what exactly this is. They confirmed that one of the characters in the show is going to be a Wookiee Jedi, as you can see here. It is High Republic, as you can see from the sort of like gold Jedi outfit here, of course. It is set during the High Republic, and specifically they confirmed that it's going to be set in sort of a bridging point between basically the High Republic and the prequels. So they're kind of framing it as very much the end of the High Republic era type thing. Still not putting an exact timeline on it, but we'll get to one other piece of information that they revealed in just a minute. They say it's from the perspective of the villains, and it's apparently Frozen meets Kill Bill. Now, my understanding of this is that it's Frozen because it seems like we have 2 characters who are like sisters in it, and then Kill Bill because it's obviously dealing with kind of villainous kind of stuff going on here. So not exactly sure what we're going to see there in terms of when they say Acolyte, what do they actually mean? Okay, it's from the villain's perspective, but is that relating quite heavily to the plot of the High Republic? So does this mean sort of like Path of the Open Hand, Path of the Closed Fist, Nihil, basically, follower of Marchion Ro? Or are we actually going to introduce the Sith into the High Republic kind of properly? Which would make sense for a villain-focused show, that maybe the Jedi are trying to come across their kind of scent or whatever, trying to figure out what's going on here. Because of course we know in this era the Sith have to be in hiding because they can't be publicly known until Darth Maul in the prequels. So there is obviously Sith around. Rule of Two continues even in this era. But like how far back do we particularly go here? Because of course we know Palpatine, of course, is relatively old by the time his plan is enacted. His master is Plagueis, who is immune, who lives quite a long time. And then it's obviously not canon anymore necessarily, the details surrounding before that. But it feels like the timeline works out where we're probably talking about, like, if we consider it to be canon, Darth Plagueis' master Tenebris, or the guy just before him, who I think is a Twi'lek, based on the Darth Plagueis book anyway. So I don't know if that's what they're doing, but it will be interesting to see what exactly they do. I definitely took it as they're not relying on you to have read the books to do this. This is going to be this, in a way, different era within the High Republic era. That, yes, there'll be a few nods, details that people who have read a lot of the books, I think, will be more familiar with because they just know the era. But I very much get the impression this is quite far removed from everything else going on. They showed some of the cast, of course, here. They did show, stuff like, we're going to see Jedi in this show as well. It's not just completely villain-focused. Of course, they're highlighting the Jedi of this era as well. And yeah, there's a bunch of different species, and it's going to be interesting to see all the different lightsabers, and there's a bunch of different colors as well, much more purple lightsabers, yellow lightsabers, a lot more variety of styles. More Jedi are like dual wielding lightsabers and so on. So there's a lot going on here. But the other thing is this, one of the things that they announced at the High Republic panel was that Vernestra Rwoh is going to be in the Acolyte. Now, they're kind of referring to her as like an elder Jedi in this. Now, there was an image shown at the panel, and it looks like very much a fully grown Vernestra, where she's like 16, I think, currently in the where we are at the story for her. So it looks like we're advancing quite a bit. Now, the thing is, like, in the High Republic, like based on Phase 1, we are 200 years, I think, exactly before Phantom Menace. So if they're going to set this in any way at a bit of a transition point, you'd assume they're moving on at maybe like 100 years. Now, Vernestra, I think, is a Mirialan. I'm not sure about how long-lived they are, but they seem to be suggesting she's an elder kind of Jedi. So I don't know if it just means that like she actually does have a normal human lifespan, and we're just saying like it's 20, 30, 40 years on. Or are we just saying she's long-lived, so something else is going on? The other point in this is that she is an important character, like especially going into Phase 3, she has there's a very key plot point with her in the books, that she has a certain kind of piece of information that's important, that, they could do some weird stuff to like explain what's going on with her. But straight away, very, very cool character. She obviously has a light whip. She is this kind of prodigy Jedi who actually has a Padawan at a very young age. This should be pretty exciting to get. So I think it was an interesting choice. I think you had to go for one of the younger Jedi, and she makes quite a bit of sense. But hopefully they talk more about that as they go forward. Then Mandalorian Season 3, basically with this, it's just that they showed a clip, and then later I think a full screening of the episode to people in the audience. I won't go into this too much, but it seems like straight away in Episode 7 we are going to get straight into the bigger plot. Anyone worried that the last episode, Episode 6, was kind of representative of this season? It seems like we are going to get straight back on track with the broader picture of what we're doing with the kind of New Republic era, with the kind of storytelling for the kind of Mandalorian, Mandoverse type stuff. But yeah, not too much to say there. Skeleton Crew. This is one, when they announced it, I really didn't know what to make of it. To some degree, I still don't know what to make of this one. But what they confirmed here is obviously some of the cast, the directors and stuff like that. Jude Law is going to be our main character. He's going to be playing a Jedi. And again, it's set in the Mandalorian era. So they say that here. So I guess this will minorly tie in with some of that stuff, perhaps. So he is a surviving Jedi, which makes it interesting by itself. And it seems like we're getting this idea that the kids have run away from home. They get kidnapped. The Jedi, Jude Law character, saves them. And I guess this forms this skeleton crew. What exactly the show is going to be about, I don't particularly know, but it seems like they're very much going for this dynamic that has worked for them in a lot of shows, which is, what if we just kind of like pair up a bunch of young characters and do this sort of found family style dynamic. So who knows, but I get the impression it's coming in 2024. This might be one of those shows that just ends up being it comes out, no one really knows what to make of it, and it surprises us all with just how surprisingly good it is. I think that's where I'm at with this one, but it's very much kind of pressure off for me. Ahsoka, of course. So they have the trailer, which I'll just quickly cover shortly. So I think, they're building more up to this one. It's August 2023. This is kind of our next big thing we're building towards. So we got, of course, our first look at Sabine in the show. Of course, pretty cool in the armor with the kind of colors, the painted aspect of her character, which is kind of cool. We got Hera in live action again, which is nice. And of course, we did get the trailer as well, which again is all kind of covered here. Also, Chopper we did get to see as well. We obviously saw Zeb in the recent episode of The Mandalorian, and Ezra is covered in the show itself. So, a few things to cover here. I don't want to cover like the whole thing necessarily, but just to highlight a few kind of key points here as we go through this. So, the first thing I wanted to show, so obviously there's Hera. And there's Chopper, of course, so that's nice. And obviously the Ghost, I guess, is involved here as well. We have one of our Jedi, what am I saying here? Like Dark Jedi. I don't really know what the idea is with these characters. They're obviously villains. They have the kind of orangey like lightsabers. I would hesitate to call them full-on Sith red lightsabers, but I don't know who these characters necessarily are. I'm assuming this is probably the remnants of the Inquisitors, because where the Ahsoka show is set, which is in the same era as The Mandalorian, you have to assume that there are some remaining Inquisitors out there. And with the structure of like their system having fallen, with the fall of basically the two Sith Lords at the top of the Empire, it kind of opens that space that like they are the remaining dark side users in the galaxy. So I'm wondering, is that what's going on here? That like whoever the most powerful Inquisitor was sort of like took over and quote unquote took on the mantle of the next kind of Sith Lord, and that's what's going on here, is this sort of like almost false continuation of the Sith Lords. And that's what's going on here with our kind of apprentice character here, and then our what seems like our master character here. That's all I can think of right now, unless they're going to go down some sort of a just dark Jedi road and kind of contrast sort of Ahsoka's path with the path of these characters, that they're maybe not full on Sith, but that's kind of what they're going for. Then we do have to talk about this. We did get the reveal of Thrawn here, of course, and it feels like that's what they're really heavily building towards. The timing on this reveal feels really kind of spot on with everything that's happening. Literally, the words "heir to the Empire" are uttered here, so this is very suggestive of kind of like what we're kind of building towards overall. And then I think it's really just, this. So Sabine is watching the sort of like hollow recording of Ezra, and it seems like Sabine is sort of like living where Ezra lived as well, because like they have the Loth cats and stuff like that. So I guess she remains on Lothal. So that's kind of an interesting one. It's obviously been the motivation of the character in this era. So that's pretty exciting to see what they do there. And obviously with Ahsoka herself, they teased the whole idea of, what rebel, Jedi, outcast, and some action stuff. Then we have the droid here from The Gathering, who helps the younglings build their lightsabers, who has obviously survived into this era. I wonder what exactly the involvement is going to be here, but it looks pretty exciting. It obviously feels directly like this is the Rebel Season 5 style show, and I'm very interested to see just how this show kind of flows and works out, because obviously people love Ahsoka. This is going to be the live action introduction to a lot of Rebels cast. There's some Mon Mothma stuff going on here. Of course, the Thrawn stuff is very exciting. I think they later confirmed, was it Lars Mikkelsen is the actor for Thrawn, and he voiced Thrawn as well. So that all makes sense. There is, I think, some leaked image of him facing the right direction. So there's that. And then we go into the movie announcements, which of course are some of the things that they're actually like leading with. But of course, they did talk about this. They put out the timeline thing to highlight where these movies are actually set. Now, this isn't the full thing. The full thing is actually this. So it includes the new Jedi Order on the timeline as well. So just to talk about this a little bit by itself, I like this because I think this gives me a little bit more confidence that these movies are actually going to happen. Yes, there is still not a lot of detail presented about any of these three movies, but at least they've attached a director to each of these movies and given you at least a basic idea about what the plan is for it. And the fact that they brought up a timeline here to tell you where these movies are set, I think shows that there's more planning with these ones compared to so many of the previous movies, which they're still saying are still in production. Like the Rian Johnson trilogy, apparently Rogue Squadron could still actually happen. Taika Waititi, what does he still has a movie, all this sort of craziness going on, but there was never any detail attached to any of those movies except Rogue Squadron, which felt a little bit maybe limited. But I think even Kathleen Kennedy was kind of like that might change into being a series, which I think makes a bit more sense for Rogue Squadron rather than it being a movie. I think they know that they need to do something more kind of notable with the movies than something like that, so that's interesting. But yeah, let's go through this. So we'll start actually in the middle, just so we get sort of familiar with where we are. So the Fall of the Jedi era, this is the prequel era. Based on what the others are named and so on, this literally has to refer to, I suppose, the initial era directly before Episode 1, couple of years directly leading up to Episode 1, throughout Episode 1, 2, and 3. So this is where the Clone Wars and all this sort of stuff happens. Palpatine's plan coming to fruition happens here. And immediately at the end of Episode 3, we transition into the Reign of the Empire era, which is where I think the likes of Kenobi, Bad Batch are set. This is where the rebellion, I suppose, hasn't fully formed just yet. And it's more of, the Empire is in full control and there's not that much opposition. So I assume this is sort of where Andor is set, and then Andor sort of like bridges a bit of the gap between these. Age of Rebellion, I'm assuming this is where the original trilogy fully comes into play, is that kind of, just before Episode 4, getting into Episode 4, 5, 6 is where the Age of Rebellion happens, and this ends with Episode 6, which transitions us into the New Republic era, which is basically where The Mandalorian is set, Skeleton Crew is set, Book of Boba Fett is set, Ahsoka is set here as well. This is what we've been exploring quite a lot at the moment. So this is obviously getting explored a lot at the moment. This is our kind of in-between Episode 6 and 7 stuff. This then transitions us into the Rise of the First Order, which is basically the, I suppose, build up to the sequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy itself, with the sequel trilogy ending and bringing us into this new era called the New Jedi Order, which is what we'll talk about in just a second. Now, let's go backwards from Fall of the Jedi. So we obviously have the High Republic. We know about this. If you've read the novels, you know what this is. This is the Jedi at their height. This is the Republic founding a lot of, the main hyperspace lanes, the galaxy becoming more connected, more united, and in general, an era of peace. But of course, it's Star Wars. There's always going to be some sense of conflict, and that's what the High Republic books sort of are covering in a way, is how the era goes from being the Jedi at their peak to the kind of decline of the fall of the Jedi. Before that, we have the Old Republic. And this is interesting because, as far as I'm aware, in canon currently, there is basically no content that is set in the Old Republic. There are references that I suppose technically make aspects of the Old Republic canon, but as far as I'm aware, there's no comic book, none of the recent video games are technically new canon content for this era. It exists, we know, and stuff like Darth Bane, of course, is real, like because he's referenced in like Clone Wars and stuff like that. We know aspects of like stuff that happens in a way in the Old Republic era, but there's no actual story content here. And to me, it being on the timeline here is just a thing. They are behind the scenes internally thinking about this. Stuff might happen with this sooner rather than later, because this is ultimately one of the eras that people have been begging for a very, very long time, because it's such a fantastic era. It feels like you, for the most part, have covered the Clone Wars like to absolute completion almost. The Old Republic allows for that sort of a dynamic because it is a kind of, you know, almost like army of Jedi versus army of Sith era. This is pre-Rule of Two. It's what gets you eventually to the Rule of Two and Darth Bane and all that sort of stuff. There's stories to tell in this era if you want to. So I hope that being included here suggests that something with this is to actually happen. Then, Dawn of the Jedi. So this is the furthest back they're highlighting one of the eras here as being effectively, this is how the Jedi came to be. This is like the first people who you know, started to use the Force and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, really, really interesting stuff. So they highlighted that as they introduced all of this stuff. So, yeah, first of all, Dawn of the Jedi era movie, directed by James Mangold. This is apparently going to be a story about the very first Jedi and sort of the origin, I suppose, of people learning to use the Force. Force sensitives using the Force for the first time. Seems very, very interesting. I believe they did some of this right at the end of Legends, basically, right before Disney took over. They did effectively a Dawn of the Jedi kind of novel and I think a comic series. So it'll be interesting to see how much they change. It's described as being a biblical epic. So that sounds interesting. That sounds very different. And I at least appreciate that they have a sense for like an idea of what this is actually going to be. I'm really interested in this. If this works out and it's the right style of story, I think this is the right way to do things, because people know what the Jedi are when it comes to Star Wars. And if you just market this movie on the basis of, here is how the Jedi began, I think people will go to see that. So I'm glad they're utilizing the eras more. They don't seem to feel like they have to connect everything to the really obvious stuff anymore, like they did at the very beginning, where it felt like it was either original trilogy or their new sequel trilogy. They then had to embrace the prequel stuff with the Clone Wars and now Rebels, which has worked out well for them. Now it feels like they're a little bit more confident to be like, hey, let's use the history of Star Wars more. So that's good. The New Republic era movie. So this is going to be directed by Dave Filoni, and it's going to be the culmination of the kind of stories of The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, all these kind of in-between episode 6 and 7 stuff. And apparently it's going to draw on Legends Expanded Universe stuff to tell an epic battle. Now, this looks to be something that is more heavily involving the Imperial remnants. It will probably result in maybe quote-unquote the defeat of the Imperial remnants, but this will allow room for the First Order to maybe rise up. I think the idea of this is that it's not going to be happening for another good few years. It feels like it's going to give time for probably The Mandalorian to have a couple more seasons, like Ahsoka to maybe have another season, them to just build up that stuff a little bit more, advance the story, and then they can, boom, do their basically Mandoverse Avengers in this movie. This sounds kind of great that it's going to happen. It's just, because there's a lot of moving parts with a bunch of shows that still need to get to that kind of crossover point, they can't really confirm much about it. It's the same goes for a lot of these. Like, there's no real date or anything like that attached to most of these movie stuff. And then we get to this one. Post Episode 9 Jedi Training Movie. So apparently it's going to be set 15 years after the Rise of Skywalker. It's going to focus on training a new generation of Jedi, and it will be Rey returning. So Daisy Ridley is back. She will be the Jedi Master of the New Order. So this is quite interesting. And again, they say much the same here. It covers Rey as she builds a new Jedi Order. So not much to particularly say about. I think did they mention anything else about this? Go back to the Dawn of the Jedi. Yeah, they just talk about, broadening their horizons there. But is this the right thing to do? I think ultimately, as a way to finally return to the sequel trilogy, this is probably the right way to do it. It effectively, to me, feels like starting the era again by doing a somewhat significant time skip. That it probably would have been the bad choice to do this immediately after and basically do a kind of effectively in episode 10. I think they're very clearly not highlighting this to be in episode 10 because they're being a little bit more cautious. They don't want to fall into that trap of kind of almost locking themselves into this thing that they have to commit to when they don't know if it's going to work. So I think attempting to tackle the sequel era again in this way feels good, in that straight away it feels like the focus here is going to be on what is the new Jedi Order in this era. And I hope they don't fall into the trap that basically the sequel trilogy did. And that is kind of just creating that dynamic where at the end of episode 6, the original trilogy, the most notable piece of Star Wars content that we have out there, our heroes finally kind of defeated the Empire, won the day, brought peace to the galaxy. And the sequels in what they did created a kind of atmosphere across the following era that made it feel like our heroes kind of fought for kind of nothing, because Luke forms a new Jedi Order that effectively exists to fall as a minute-long backstory in episode 8. They establish a new republic to replace the Empire, only for it to fall immediately upon the First Order arriving onto the scene. If they actually if our hero characters actually formed something good and brought peace to the world, why would it have fallen so quickly? And just the fact that so much of that world building of the sequel trilogy was just left utterly unexplained, as if it just doesn't matter, it's unimportant, was one of the huge problems that they faced. And I get it, they didn't want to do Senate stuff, but they were way overboard on how they purposefully chose not to do any of that stuff. And that's what they kind of have to do here, is that they're calling it the New Jedi Order, but it technically is more like the new Jedi Order, because it's almost ignoring the fact that we had Luke form a new Jedi Order, and that just didn't happen. And that's what kind of does feel odd about this, is that basically all people wanted from the sequel trilogy effectively was the new generation will be trained by Luke in a way. Probably this one is built better, is as Luke builds a new Jedi Order. When Disney took over, it feels like that's all you needed to do, is just do the continuation and characterize the original cast members, which you had when they were older, in a better way than you did in the sequel, and you missed that opportunity now. Hopefully they can do something here with Rey, because I think that's the thing here, is that I think from episode 7, people liked Rey and really liked Daisy Ridley as this character. It is purely on the writing of the sequel trilogy and what they chose to have happen, and how messy it was and unplanned it was across episode 7, 8, and 9, that kind of created these issues. They managed to, in my mind, just about salvage something from these movies at the end, in that I think the core concept for Rey and Kylo are reasonable takeaways as good things from the sequel trilogy, but I think so much else I don't feel worked. And so doing the 15-year time skip, so you don't have to directly maybe address all that stuff and can kind of almost start again, I think will work out well for them. And I like that they're taking it a little slower here, and they're seeing if they can reignite interest, I think, in the sequel era with this. It's good that they're not abandoning it, but I also like that they're not overdoing the return here. So this one will be interesting to tackle. One other interesting behind the scenes thing with this is that this, I believe, is meant to be the Damon Lindelof movie. So he obviously left this project I think it was about a month or two ago. There was news that came out that whatever project Damon Lindelof was working on, he had left, and that there were problems there. My understanding, from what I've heard, is that this is that project. So behind the scenes, it feels like there's some sort of a kind of creative thing going on here. I don't really know what. I hope that isn't suggesting that this is going to go the way of other projects already, because of course that's the big thing. There's not been a Star Wars movie since Episode 9, and that's getting to be quite a while now at this point. What are we doing in Star Wars? That's the big question. So, overall, I like what they're doing here. I maybe wish they had more directly confirmed, for instance, when the next season of The Mandalorian is coming out. But otherwise, I think they have a decent lineup here, because Andor is a success. Season 2 is in production. The Acolyte, I think, is going to be a very interesting thing. The Skeleton Crew, I think, is coming in without a lot of expectation, but could deliver. And they still have their other shows and stuff like that still to come. Anything else about the High Republic here? I won't spend too much time on this, just because I know maybe not everyone has read everything here. But of course, they announced Vernestra in live action. There's going to be an anthology YA book with a bunch of short stories. Then they also announced basically the names of nearly every book from the final phase. I think they nearly went into everything except maybe some of the comics. But, they covered what everything is going to be. This is going to be the Trials of the Jedi it says fall 2023 is when the era begins. It's all starting in November, of course. These are the middle grade books. Wait, there's so many pictures here. So what's this one? This is phase 1, isn't it? Yeah. Eye of Darkness, Escape from Valo as the middle grade, and then Defy the Storm is the YA. So that's going to be the wave 1 content. And then these are the YA books overall across the era. So you have Defy the Storm, of course, for wave 1. Tears of the Nameless is the second wave 1, and then Into the Light will be the last one of the planned phases. They do also confirm throughout this panel that the High Republic will continue after the kind of phase rollout, that even though we'll basically get the finale of the planned story, there will be more books and stuff like that coming out in the High Republic, and they'll set up plot points for post basically Project Luminous effectively. The middle grade novels are Escape from Valo, Beware the Nameless, and A Valiant Vow. This is interesting because, of course, the Nameless is effectively the leveler species. So it looks like we're going to be getting more into that, really, which is much needed in this phase. And then A Valiant Vow for the end of the middle grade ones. And then where are all the... They named all the adult novels as well, if I remember correctly. But do they have that here? Young adult, middle grade. Yeah, the way they have the images ordered here it feels just a little bit weird. But yeah, they definitely covered it all. So okay, 2 other adult novels: Temptation of the Force, and then the final one, I guess the finale in a way of phase 3, is going to be just straight up Trials of the Jedi. And that's going to be done by Charles Soule in spring 2025. And that will bring the High Republic to a close in terms of the planned content, of course. So yeah, it will continue, of course. They have the comics as well going on. They do cover the kind of teaser for some of the end of phase 2 stuff, which I almost didn't realize until basically yesterday that phase 2 is only 2 waves. I was convinced that there was a whole other batch of books coming out, but no, we're building to the finale already. We've got Path of Vengeance coming out, I think, next month. And and then just comics effectively to wrap up phase 2. So we're basically at the end of phase 2 already, which is interesting. And then there will be the manga once again, Edge of Balance Precedent. So there's a lot. And yeah, that's really all there is to say there. And then otherwise, we are waiting for, I guess, video game news as well as animation news. Now, there's already stuff like I think we effectively know that, you know, yeah, it's already been announced. Yeah, the Visions Volume 2 is happening. I guess we'll see some of that. Tales of the Jedi, I think everyone assumes it's getting a second season, and I think it got confirmed at some point like before, but I guess we'll maybe see that actually happen now. Bad Batch Season 3, I think it's going to be all about the release date. I hope it's not as long between seasons, because they need to get back to that like sooner rather than later, and then we'll see if there's anything else. So, you know, so far so good, I think, with Celebration. I think the announcements so far definitely have delivered. It's definitely on the movie front, maybe not as blow away amazing as you maybe would have expected, because they still don't really have any like locked in stone content, but they're trying to get back on track after like movies kind of went wrong for them, I suppose, and they doubled down on the streaming stuff, which was the right decision, I think, but they now have to get back around to Star Wars. Has existed for so many years as mainly a movie franchise, but it hasn't been that in quite a few years now, so it's going to be important to finally just commit to doing a movie. And like, I think the problem is like we still don't really know which one's first. When is the first movie going to be, and what's going to happen? I don't know. But yeah, they're my thoughts on the first day and a half, basically, of Star Wars Celebration. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on all the news that we got. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.